We're moving from wet season to dry season in Florida. What can we expect during this transition? Jeff, Josh, and I will shed some light on that in the Florida edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Let's start off with Jeff and a little climatology.
Let's start off with rainfall, and here's the last 30 days of departures from normal, and we see late September and early October has been fairly dry across the southeast, with some areas in the orange color there, those areas 2 to 3 inches below normal across eastern North Carolina as well as parts of Georgia and eastern sections of Florida. Looking at the last 90 days, we see most areas running close to normal, with some areas above normal, such as the western Florida panhandle there, as well as the west coast of the Florida peninsula. But even given the recent dry weather across parts of the southeast, we see, looking at year to date, most areas still well above normal, as it has been a record wet summer for much of the southeast. Still running 10 plus inches above normal in all those purple areas, with some areas 20 plus inches above normal, especially across North Georgia and the southern Appalachians, which has helped bring many of the reservoirs back to normal since last year at this time, and as well as help end drought conditions in the southeast. So given the dry weather, how have our stream flows responded? And as you can see here in the 28-day average stream flows, most areas still normal across the southeast. So our wet summer is carrying over to keep stream flows in the normal range. But also keep in mind, stream flow normals are usually lower this time of year. So these two factors helping to keep us in the normal range as far as stream flows in the southeast. So given the normal stream flows, we have not showed this in a while, but how have our reservoirs been? Looking at Georgia, most in very good shape, very close to the target curves for this time of year. Same with the Carolinas. We see the Savannah projects all near their target curves, which is great to see considering how long these were well under their target curves the past few years during the dry conditions. Lake Wateree and Lake Murray also in good shape there in South Carolina. As we go north to North Carolina, reservoirs again close to the target curves as we head into the fall. And keep in mind that many of these reservoirs will begin dropping their pools in November and December to get ready for the winter and early spring wet season. So given all this information, it is not a surprise that drought is not much of a factor in the southeast. We do have some dryness in the eastern parts of North Carolina and Virginia, but no drought conditions being observed at this time. So where do we go as far as drought and the weather through the mid-autumn period? Josh and Todd have more on this.
Let's begin with a short midterm outlook, which takes us through Thursday, October 17th. Beginning with the basic flow aloft on October 11th, you see what looks to be a pretty volatile pattern, but in actuality, pretty quiet conditions across the southeast United States, with some moisture associated with a surface low across northeast North Carolina, southeast Virginia, and then high pressure everywhere else. As we go towards October 14th, not too much change, ridging across the southeast United States for the most part, the western side, and on the eastern side, a trough associated with still the same closed low across the Atlantic Ocean, with some onshore flow and some light shower activity there, and as well as across the Florida Peninsula. But again, very quiet. And as we go towards October 17th, you see not too much change, still ridging generally across the southeast, especially the western part of the southeast United States, with that open low starting to lift out towards the northeast over the Atlantic, and then possibly an approaching cold front as the model solutions start to diverge significantly at this time. So the bottom line through the period, minimal rainfall, very typical of October. And as we go towards the basin, total basin precipitation through this period, you see that reflected very, very well. Again, the cold front coming in from the west could mean higher precip towards the west across Mississippi and Alabama, and then the coastal low throwing moisture and precipitation onshore could mean some slightly higher totals across the coastal plain and outer banks of North Carolina. Again, the bottom line, quiet conditions until that cold front approaches. So the long-term outlook is where things get a little bit more interesting, and the model guidance, again, very divergent through this period. By about the 15th, 16th, the major models that we look at really start to diverge in their solutions, and so things get very complicated. But overall, as a mean flow by October 18th, we should expect to see a trough somewhere across the central portions of the United States. So that would put us in a southwesterly flow, and if we have a cold front approaching, it should start to stall out across the southeast United States as indicated by the stationary front. And so we should see heavier precip towards the west, tapering off towards the east as the front weakens as it works its way towards the ridge over the Atlantic Ocean. So As we get towards the end of the period, not too much change. Perhaps the mean trough in the flow aloft starts to shift a little bit further east. And that again puts portions of the southeast United States in southwesterly flow, especially Florida. And what's very interesting about the model guidance is some of the ensemble members from some of the guidance suggest that there might be a tropical low of some kind. We're not sure how significant the low would be, and it may not even be a low. It just may be a plume of moisture originating from the western Caribbean and then surging north and then northeast across the Florida Peninsula and maybe coastal Carolinas as well. That is a very climatologically reasonable solution for this time of year, so it's nothing out of the ordinary. So it wouldn't be something that we would disregard because it doesn't look realistic. But at the same time, it's just a few of the members of some of the guidance. So we don't want to start predicting that there's going to be some tropical storm of any kind, but it's something to keep an eye out for as we go towards this period of the month. Therefore, the total basin precipitation, again, best chances for significant rainfall across northern Alabama, northeast Mississippi, and portions of north Georgia, and then potentially some moderate rainfall across the Florida Peninsula as we get some tropical moisture affected north. And the bottom line, again, significant model differences lead to very low confidence during this period.
Thank you, Josh. Now that you mentioned the climatology of hurricanes and so forth, let's look a little bit about the tropical cyclone genesis. And what we're looking at here is the last 150 years over the Atlantic Ocean and the last a little over 50, almost 60 years over the Pacific Ocean of tropical cyclone genesis, where we've had hurricanes or tropical systems form in those areas. And this kind of gives you an idea, like over the next 10 days, where we might expect those to form. And again, we still get storms to form out in the Atlantic during this time, although it does start to become less. And as we start to go forward and we look at the end of the month, the 20th through the 31st, you can see we still have some out there, but we're starting to get a little bit less in each time period. We get to the early November, and you can see it goes down just a little bit more. And again, as we get to the middle of November, and then by the end of November, we have very little genesis in that area. So as we look forward, we really start to wind down the season. And again, we're on the backside of the season. Our peak was in the middle of September, and really we look to the middle of October to really kind of get out of the season. And so things really are kind of slowing down. So now let's look a little bit further ahead. And one of the things I wanted to show, we had a very cold Arctic summer. It's the shortest in recorded history, and because of it, we actually had ice grow during this time. And if you compare the left graphic to the right graphic, August 2012, this shows how much ice was over the polar ice cap. And when we look at August 2013, you can see that it's growing. And one of the ways it might impact our weather is that because we have more ice up there, and because of the changes, and because we have so much cold air bottled up there, they've talked about the European winter being a little bit colder, and the potential for it to be colder, and not necessarily cold through the whole time, but have more hot and cold spells. And I think the same thing is probably true for the United States, and that dipping into the southeast. So it's very possible that we may have a lot more maybe cold and warmer spells in the southeast, which might make for more active weather. Right now, it doesn't lead us to believe one way or the other we'll have more rain or not, but from a temperature standpoint, it could affect our weather. Again, it's something we're going to have to watch. It's one more thing that we're looking at to try and give us a hint, since we don't have an El Nino, we don't have a La Nina, we don't have a large-scale worldly system impacting our southeast. And so now let's look at the 1 month precipitation. Now this was done on September 30th, and I think there was the expectation that we might see some tropical weather in the southeast, that we might be more active. Well, it's ended up, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we haven't been quite as wet. And as Josh talked about, it looks like we'll stay dry through at least the early part of October. And so this may end up being kind of a bust. We may end up not getting the wet weather that we kind of expected. Again, we still, in this particular case, they talk about a 40% chance of above normal rain, 33% chance of near normal rain, and it leaves us with a 27% chance of below normal rain. Well, we may end up in that, where we still have below normal rain. So we'll have to see as we get close to the end of the month. As Josh mentioned, as we get near the end of the month, the models kind of diverge. So there's a chance we could actually see this come to fruition and that we could see a little bit above normal rain We'll just have to see. Now, in the last Water Resources Outlook, we talked about this. Our 3-month precipitation outlook for October, November, and December shows equal chances. I think this is reasonable. There's nothing to lean us one way or the other. And then that continues to be the case for the January, February, March timeframe. We're looking at below normal. Again, that's model guidance, and that's what CPC is kind of showing right now. As Jeff mentioned, with the reservoirs and so forth, we're in very good shape right now. Everything's near normal. They'll start to drop their levels during that time. So even if we see some below normal precipitation, our reservoirs should stay in good shape, and we should be in good shape until at least spring. And then we're going to have to start watching things very closely as we move into spring. So the bottom line for Florida, in the short term, I show an end to tropical activity, but as Josh mentioned, in the second week, it looks like there could be some sort of tropical activity. The models are hinting at it, and so not necessarily a tropical storm, but we could stay a little bit wet and a little bit active. So we'll be watching that real close, and if it does get active and could impact the rivers, we'll be sure and let you know. As for the long term, we're looking ahead to dry season. Things are transitioning from the tropical wet season into the dry season, so things should be a little bit quieter, and the forecasts indicate that so far. Our next Water Resources Outlook will be recorded on October 30th. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Remember, you can find much of this information at our website at weather.gov/SERFC. Also, come and visit our Facebook page where we will provide notifications of products we issue. Also, feel free to comment and pass that information along. And if you have any questions or comments, please contact me at the email address todd.hamel@noaa.gov.